Welcome to Trust Builders Network. This is March of 2013. I'm Lou Costabile. I'm introducing Dan Wallace, and Dan is a Harvard MBA. He is works with Tailwind. He's a partner there, and they take businesses and improve them. And he's going to share the business topic today. Dan?
Thank you, and thanks very much for the opportunity to be here. So Tom asked me before what I do. What I do is I help owners get more of what they want from their businesses, which oftentimes means helping business owners become millionaires, and I love it when I can have the chance to do that. It also means helping them get whatever it is they want out of the business. Sometimes it's more growth, it's more profit. Oftentimes it's getting their life back. So they get to define what it is they want. My job is to help them get it. To explain how we go about that, we go about it by helping them implement a system and a set of tools and processes that make them better. I want to start just by giving you an analogy. And the analogy is to the operating system in your computer. We all use them. Every computer, every one of us uses, has a layer of software that we call the operating system, which is the most foundational layer of the machine. It does the most basic stuff the machine has to be able to do in order to work. So it's things like how it talks to you as the user, how it talks to other computers, how it opens and closes, and saves and retrieves and so forth. As a user, you spend, I'm going to guess, 3 to 5% of your time actually touching the operating system. Because you spend all of your time working in the applications that run on top of it. But the operating system is down there at the foundation, defining how well the machine runs and what it's like to use the machine. So the experience of using a Windows machine is very different from using a Mac or Linux machine. And it's different in character, even though those operating systems do the same things. And it's different in quality. Macs don't crash as often as Windows machines do. Businesses, it turns out, run sort of the same way. There's a set of things that go on in every company. You can think of sort of forming an operating system in the business. I say that because these are things you can't have a business and not deal with some form or other. Every business in one way or another deals with questions like, who are we? Why are we here? Where are we going? How do we intend to get there? Who's going to get us there? Are we getting there or not? When we find out we're not getting there, we discover that we have issues. How do we handle those things so that we solve them and they go away, or do we let them persist in the business? How do we prioritize resources? How do we set goals? How do we focus our attention to stay focused on those goals so we get them done? How do we spend team time together so that it's productive? How do we run meetings? These things happen in every company, and it turns out that they perform collectively that same kind of foundational role that the operating system in a computer plays. And two things turn out to be true about these things. The first is, like the operating system in a computer, it turns out that when companies get good at those things I just described, the business does better. The system I use to help companies do this, we've now taken about 550 companies through it, and time after time after time, we find that when they get good at those things, which is what I help companies do, the businesses start growing faster, they become more profitable, the chaos goes away, everything gets better. The other thing that turns out to be true about those foundational aspects of the business is that it's so basic that everyone seems to take for granted that people know how to do it, and we don't. And Lou mentioned when he was introducing me, I have the privilege of being a graduate of the world's most famous business school. I guarantee you, I didn't get taught how to do this stuff. I'm an alumnus of the Boston Consulting Group, one of the world's great, big, famous strategy consulting firms. I guarantee you, they don't know how to do this stuff. I've run 3 businesses, the one that I mentioned before. What I now know in retrospect is that I was doing about half the stuff well naturally, and another half I wasn't doing all that well. And for all the success we had in that company, it would have been much better if we had those other pieces in place. So my job is to go into companies and help them see this perspective that there is sort of this operating system, and then teach them a set of tools and processes that help them get strong and effective at those basic things that I described. So this is what the model looks like that I use. There are different ways to get there, by the way. I know what Mary does. I've met with Mary's partner. They have an approach to attacking many of these same things. There are different ways to get there. The approach I use is a system called EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System, and this is the way we describe it. Say there's really 6 components to the operating system, and we'll start by putting your business, whatever it is, in the middle of this world. And these are the 6 components. The first is vision, which is all about who are we as people, where are we going, how do we intend to get there, and how do we get people aligned with that. The second component is people. Not a lot of whiteboard space here. Can you read that from the back of the room? Okay. People is about who's going to get us there, because it takes a great team to accomplish a great vision. The third is data. Data is about being objective in our understanding of how the business is going, being able to take the pulse of the company and know in real time how we're doing, so that if things aren't going right, we can intervene and fix. When these three things are in place, we're crystal clear about where we're going. We have a great team to get us there. We know who's supposed to do what, and we're measuring so we know whether or not we're getting there. You get this enormous level of transparency in the business. Nothing can hide anymore. So what happens is all the issues in the business come to the surface. All the challenges, hurdles, problems, obstacles, opportunities, everything that departs from the plan just has a way of coming to the surface. The fifth component is process, which is, big companies tend to be all over this, small companies tend to be less aware of process. This is about the things we do over and over again that make us us, our business model. If we were going to franchise this business, what's the notebook we give to somebody to say, we're going to go to St. Louis and start a St. Louis version of our company. And the last component we call traction, because at the end of the day, this whole process is about bringing it down to ground level and actually getting work done. Right? Because it's all about getting stuff done day to day. So this is the model that I teach, and now I need your help, because there are two different versions of this talk that I do. My sense is that most of you, I think Tom may be the lone exception. Tom runs an operating company with 20-ish employees. But I have the sense that most of you are trusted advisors, single, solo or small company entrepreneurs, salespeople. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So help me with this. With that kind of group, normally what I do is just quickly talk through this model and explain, just sort of give you a look at what's under the hood. In talking with groups of business owners, one of the things we'll do is we'll sort of break off the people component and actually go through some exercises where you figure out where you do and don't have the right people in the right seats. I'm happy to do either one. The one where you do the exercises is actually a lot of fun, but if you're not running a business, it may not resonate. So just do the talk.
Do the talk.
Do the talk? Okay, that's what we're going to do then. So these go away. And I'm going to go pretty fast and kind of hit the wave tops. I do actually normally take between 60 and 75 minutes to do this, so we're going to move a little faster. I'm going to hang on to one of these. Okay. By the way, all the information that's on my business card is on the front of this. So I have cards with me, and if you want one, let me know. But my contact information is all there. So here's how this process works. To start with vision, when we work on vision with a company, first off, I hate even using the word. It's been so overused and abused, but I don't have a better term. So we're going to talk about vision. This is all about who are we as a group of people, why is this company here, where are we going, how do we intend to get there, and then how do we get people aligned with that, because at the end of the day we want everybody engaged, embracing where the company's going, and we want them all rowing in the same direction. So to do that, we answer 8 questions. The 8 questions are on this form, in 2 pages, a page called Vision and a page called Traction. One of the things you'll notice about this process as we talk through it, you'll never hear me talk about vision without also talking about traction. Traction is right underneath vision in this model. The reason you'll never hear me talk about vision without talking about traction is that vision without traction is hallucination. Okay? It doesn't get you anywhere. So again, remember that this whole thing is about bringing it down to ground level and getting great work done day to day. So the vision traction organizer, which is what these 2 pages are called, sort of the 2-page business plan, and it actually turns out to be enough for most companies to run the business effectively. It has a very interesting way of provoking all the discussions that need to happen. So here are the questions that we answer the topics that we address as we go through this with the team. First is, what are our core values? Because the core values turn out to be the foundation of the culture of the company. Again, here's another term I hate to use because it's been overused, it's been abused. Lots of core values work has been done in companies. Some of it's been great work, but it tends to be done in 3-day offsites. We're going to go to mission, vision, values, gets put in a plaque up on the wall, and then nothing ever happens. So when we do this work, we do it as discovery work because the core values are already there in the business. We got to find them, but we got to make them real. I'll tell you, the best set of core values I've ever seen come from a company in San Francisco called Method. We make environmentally friendly cleaning products. Here are Method's core values. Keep Method weird. What would MacGyver do? Innovate, don't imitate. Collaborate like crazy, and care. You know, if you're like me, when you hear those, you know immediately whether or not this is a company you fit in, right? Very clear. Right? That's the foundation of the culture. I've never seen a set done any better than that. So we want to get at those core values because they define who we are as a group of human beings, having nothing to do with what business we're in. The next thing we do is define what we call a core focus, which is as close as we're going to get to a mission statement. The mission statements tend to be very kind of fuzzy and future-oriented and not very actionable. We do it a little differently here. We divide it into two pieces. One is getting clear about what purpose or cause or passion we're here to pursue. Why is it important that this company exist? And then what business niche do we occupy? And again, this is one of the wave tops I'm going to skip over a little bit, but if I went through a couple of examples, you'd see that what it does is it makes that definition in the business very tangible today, even if you haven't achieved it. And it does two things for you. One is it helps people in the company figure out, even if they have the core values, is this ship going someplace where I want to go? Because if it's not, then maybe I want to get off the ship. So it helps people really embrace the vision if it's a good fit for them. It also tells you what's in the center of the bullseye, so you have a filter for deciding what's in, what's out. If it's consistent with our core focus, we do it, and if it's not, we push it off to the side, and that's how we avoid some of the shiny stuff. Third thing we do is figure out a long-term tangible target for the company. We talk in terms of the 10-year target. I've seen them be as short as 4, as long as 20, but this is a quantified, measurable expectation. So if the core focus is sort of conceptually where we're going, the 10-year target, whatever time period we set, is the tangible. It's the lighthouse the ship is sailing toward. Then we do a high-level marketing strategy consisting principally of two things. A very clear definition of our ideal customer who we really want to be spending our time on, and a definition of the 3, roughly 2 to 4 things that make us unique and different and special in the eyes of our customer. So who do we want to talk to? What's the story we want to tell them? And that winds up informing all of our marketing communications. And then the last box on the right, we start to pivot from vision to traction. We do this thing called the 3-year picture, which is a very high-level strategic plan. We're going to quantify a couple of things. Future date, revenue, profit, 1 or 2 other things we might measure. And then from there, all we're going to do is describe what this business is going to look like in 3 years. Right? It's literally a visualization exercise because if we can picture it in our heads, we're just much more likely to actually go and do it. Then if you turn the page, you transition from vision to traction. The 3-year picture sets context for us to decide if that's where we want to be in 3 years and what we want it to look like. What are the 3 to 7 things that are most important to do in the next 12 months in order to be on track to get there? 3 to 7, less is more. Turns out that we make a lot more progress if we pick a small number of goals and get them done completely, and then move to the next set, than if we try to move a lot of stuff forward at one time. That 1-year plan sets the context for what we call rocks. I'm, again, not going to take the time to explain why we use the term, but these are 90-day goals because we're creating a 90-day cadence in the business. So what are the 3 to 7 things that are most important to get done in the next 90 days in order to be on track to achieve the 1-year plan, to achieve the 3-year picture, to achieve the 10-year target? And then the last thing we do is we create a parking lot we call an issues list. So there are going to be things we consider as 90-day goals that just didn't make the list because we don't have the bandwidth to do them. Don't want to forget about them. So we're going to put them on the issues list. Anything important comes up during the next quarter, we're not going to stop what we're doing. We're just going to put it on the list. So we're never that, it's amazing how fast a quarter goes. We're never that far away from having a chance to take it off the shelf and decide if we want to deal with it. And that lets us stay focused on the things we decided are most important and get them done. So going through as a team the process of answering those 8 questions, what we do is we create the context for alignment. So now the leadership team is rowing in the same direction. And then what we're going to do, we call it SBA, shared by all, is we're going to start sharing that document with the entire team so that everybody knows the direction the leadership team is set. They start to hear about the core values over and over again. They see us setting those goals and achieving them. And then we're going to have everybody in the company, we're going to cascade this process down so that everybody in the company starts participating in it. So that's how we handle the vision part of this. Any questions or comments? I invite them, by the way, please. Feel free to ask questions.
Do you involve the employees in the vision development, or is it strictly the executive team?
We do this work with the executive or leadership team. It just turns out to be more efficient and try to get everybody involved. And really, they're the ones who are accountable for creating and for setting the direction. So that's the vision component. People component. We have this gift from Jim Collins in Good to Great of the phrase, get the right people in the right seats. Right? So that's how we think about this. Our job as leaders is to get the right people on the bus and get them in the right seats. Again, I'm kind of going to hit the wave tops here because there's some sketching that I would normally do. We just don't have time to do it. But right people, very simple definition of right people. They have our core values. Because if they have our core values, then they're going to be a cultural fit. We want disagreement. We have all kinds of different perspectives. But at the end of the day, we have to be able to agree and align. And the core values are what are going to let us do that. So if somebody has our core values, simple rating plus, minus, and minus on about 5 core values, then they're going to be a cultural fit. We'll call them right person. Right seats, a little more complicated. We use a tool we call the accountability chart, which is an org chart, sort of an org chart on steroids, because what we're going to do is we're not going to make it about titles and positions. We're going to make it about the seats that the company needs, the clearest, most transparent way to organize the work. And what the person who winds up in each of those seats needs to focus on. So at that point, what we're doing is we're sort of assigning all the fly balls this team needs to catch to one person, and we're doing that very clearly. We're doing it on paper, so there's no confusion about who owns what issues. And we do structure first, people second. So only once we've laid the work out in the buckets we think make the most sense, looking forward the next 6 to 12 months, and we figured out what each of those seats is going to be accountable for, only then do we talk about who goes into what seats, because we've redefined what the seats mean. And this becomes a living document because the business changes. So the test for whether somebody is right in the seat is the answer to 3 questions. Does she get it? Does she want it? Does she have the capacity to do it? So get it and capacity, they're different questions. One's about understanding and one is about ability. But you can think of those, the answer to those questions being, do I think he or she was put on this earth to do that job? Once it is about whether he or she thinks they were put on this earth to do that job. Right? And what you find is that there are much more complicated assessments that can be done. But what you'll find is that when you work with people, you can answer these questions. Very consistently, we find people can get to that point. And the rule is that it's got to be yeses. Right? If you have a no, so you have somebody that doesn't get it, or they don't really want it, or they don't have the capacity to do it, your team is only as strong as its weakest link. So to get to 100% right people in right seats, you've got to pass that GWC test. So at or over our bar on core values means we have right people, and all yeses on GWC means we have people in the right seats. So as fast as I can do it, that's the people component. Any questions there? Comments? Okay, the data component. What we're trying to do here is simply learn to be objective and to use data both to find out where there are things we need to address and to help learn to hold ourselves accountable. So we do 2 things here. The first is we build a scorecard. And the scorecard, very simple, somewhere between 5 and 15 things we can measure every week. The best one I have going in a client, they run the company on 6 numbers in the week. Right? Quarterly, monthly, they're much deeper financials, but week-to-week operating numbers, there are 6 numbers they look at. We're trying to get activities that predict future results. So the classic example would be in sales, right? If we know Lou's yield on appointments, what his conversion rate is, and we know his sales cycle, all we have to know is how many appointments Lou had last week, and we know what to expect from him in 60 or 90 days. Those are the kinds of things that we can measure on the scorecard. So very quick pulse taking, it just tells us if we're executing the activities that are going to produce the results that we expect. So our scorecard reporting tends to sound like made it, missed it, made it, missed it, missed it, made it, missed it. Right? Not complicated. How many of these were we supposed to do last week? How many did we do? Are we in the black or are we in the red on each of those numbers? Then the other thing that happens in terms of data, and this, by the way, the scorecard is not intended to be an analytic or diagnostic tool. It's an early warning system. All it does is tell you we're missing something here. Right? We're not making our numbers in some place, and that tells the team we've got to go dive in and figure out what's going on. The other thing we do in data is we introduce this concept of measurables. The process I'm describing, we're going to cascade down to every team in the company. Every team in the company is going to wind up having a scorecard. So your finance department is going to have one, your sales department is going to have one, your operations department. Every number on the scorecard is owned by somebody because this is all about accountability, right? And what's more accountable than these are the 3 numbers? These guys know, right? Your owners of the bank, right? Ultimate accountability. Everybody who sells, right? It's the paycheck. What we're going to do is, as we cascade this process down, every team gets a scorecard. Every number on every scorecard is owned by somebody, and the result is that everybody in the business winds up owning 1 or 2 or 3 numbers. Write down to the person who answers the phone, 2 rings good, 3 rings bad. Everybody gets a number, and that reinforces the notion that we quantify, we measure, we hold ourselves accountable for what we do. The issues component, again, once these things are in place, you can see now we're crystal clear about where we're going. We've got the right people in the right seats to get us there. We're measuring whether or not we're getting there. The degree of transparency you get when this happens is incredible. Nothing can hide, right? Because we know what we're supposed to be getting done. We know who is supposed to do it. We know whether or not it's getting done. And what that does is it just brings all the issues to the surface. We tell our clients sunlight is the best disinfectant. We're going to throw open the shutters. The sunlight is going to come in, and all the rats and cockroaches that have been scurrying to, they have no place to hide. Right? So you get this wonderful opportunity to solve issues. So we do 2 things with issues. The first, I apologize, I know that's hard to read. It says list and IDS. So list, we introduced this concept, I mentioned it before, we were looking at the Vision Traction Organizer, this notion of putting issues on the list. And the idea here simply is that we oftentimes, and we're all like this, that issues pop up and they're interesting and they distract us from stuff maybe we don't want to do, whatever it is, we tend to run off and focus on them, lose focus on what we were supposed to do. One of the things we want to instill here is just the habit and the practice that when an issue comes up, it goes on the list. Right? So if Tom's keeping the issues list and something happens to me, I'm just going to pop him an email or a phone call and say, Tom, would you put this on the issues list? Because, by the way, in addition to that quarterly cadence, and I'll talk about this in a minute, there's a weekly cadence. We're never more than 4 or 5 days away from the chance to figure out if that issue is something that we need to deal with. So once I've handed that off to Tom, because he's the keeper of the list, now it's out of my head, it's captured, it's going to be there waiting for us, and I don't have to spend time thinking about it. I can get back to executing the things that I told the team I was going to do this week. So that discipline turns out to be really helpful in clearing out the underbrush and keeping people focused. The second thing we do, this thing we call the issue solving track, or IDS, stands for Identify, Discuss, Solve. Here's what happens typically when companies tackle issues. They go straight to discuss and then get stuck on discuss. So I'm sure it's never happened to anybody in this room. It's happened to me. I'm sure it's never happened to any of you. That you go into a meeting, and let's say there's a written agenda. Just for grids, let's imagine that there is one. The first issue is a number that we missed, and we're going to tackle that number. And so we report the number, and then somebody says something, and somebody else says something else, and somebody else chimes in. 45 minutes later, Mary, who's running the meeting, is wiping sweat off her brow, and she goes, you know, we've discussed this together, we better move on. I'm sure nobody here has ever been in that. The cure for that is learning to get to root causes first, which is the I phase, identify phase of IDS. So part of what I teach my client teams is how to question each other, how to present an issue, how to question each other, so that pretty quickly we get down to the root cause, because it turns out that most of the time when you really have the root cause, the issue is actually pretty easy to solve. Not always, sometimes they're really complicated, but usually if you're having a really hard time figuring out what to do, it's because you haven't gotten down to what the real issue is. We have a rule that once we're all clear, right, and clear is, you know, it's Bill's issue, right, and clear is when I can say it back to Bill, and he goes, yeah, you got it right, and I can look around and go, right, everybody get that. That's when we know we got it right. Discuss is if anybody wants to say anything that doesn't directly relate to solving it. And the rule is, once around the table, if anybody has anything they just want to say, because more than once is politicking, and we're not going to politic. Right? And after that, if your jaw is moving, it's because you're proposing a solution to the problem. If we do these things as best we understand it, the issue will go away forever. What we see happening, it's the way I know this process is working with my teams. One of the ways I know. When we first start, we get an issues list that is huge. 120 issues. And what happens is that over the course of a couple of quarters, as they start to learn how to use these tools, that list gets smaller and smaller, and then it starts to turn over. Okay? And that's how we know they have traction. Right? Again, the whole thing is about gaining traction. So that's what we do on the issues front.
Share more about the questioning to determine root cause.
Okay, so tell me about an issue at work then. Just name an issue.
Building the pipeline.
Okay.
Sales, getting appointments, building the pipeline.
All right, so in the interest of time,
please,
I'm going to give you an example.
Yes.
I'm going to give you an example. So I have a client that runs a chain of hearing aid clinics. And a year or so ago, we run a quarterly session with them. We got to our issue solving time, and there's an issue about whether they're going to fire one of their audiologists. She's in a remote location, has one assistant working with her, doesn't get a lot of supervision. She's not producing very good results. That's what we know. And so the issue that's on our issues list, because we have one on the board, is fire her or not. And as the discussion started, and it was a discussion, this side of the table is saying fire her now. And this side of the table, it's like a junior high school dance, it really was. This side of the table is going, give her another chance, we just haven't been fair. And this went on for a couple of minutes, and I finally just stopped and I said, I'm confused, why don't we know? Why don't we know what the right answer is? It took about 45 seconds for the answer to tumble out of the table. It's because we don't really have good metrics. We don't have a scorecard for an audiologist. So we don't really have good data. We don't know if she is simply not doing the things she's supposed to do, or if she's doing them, she's not doing them very well. If she's not doing them very well, is she trainable or not? Right? Those are sort of the three puzzles. We don't know. So we get to that point, the owner says, I can create that scorecard in 10 minutes. The woman who runs the company day to day says, I can implement it in 15 minutes. And 6 months later, they have their answer, and she's not with the company anymore. Okay? So there's sort of an issue behind the issue. I had one actually I made references to the pinball company. There's a company in Melrose Park called Stern Pinball, which I work with. I'm there with a private equity firm I have an affiliation with, and so I spend time. I do this with them, and I do some other things there. We had an issue. Everybody struggles with this. This is the hardest part of the process, this IDS thing, because it's intangible. Right? I can explain it, but when people get it right, the speed at which they move through issues is incredibly fast. In their early stages, we had a moment in a leadership team meeting where the guy who handles retail sales, we're coming out with a game that's intended for the retail market. It doesn't have the coin mechanism and all that stuff. He needs to know when he can take the thing to Costco so that he can show it to them and see if they want to put some on the floor for the holidays. This discussion erupts about the bill of materials and the engineering. We're having trouble with this vendor or that. Getting to this really narrow focus, Mike needs a date. Right? All we have to do is, Mike needs the date. That's all we have to work on. Those other things are separate issues, right? So part of this process is learning to get really clear and compartmentalize the issues so things don't trip over each other. So, issues component. Good there? All right. The process component. We talk in terms of two things, and we do things a little bit differently than you might have seen them done elsewhere. The first is just getting people to document processes, because the processes typically exist in most companies. They oftentimes just, well, Jill does sales process, right? Typically hasn't been documented. They do it, there is a process, but because it hasn't been documented, there are lots of versions of that process. So, when we do this, we don't have our clients draw detailed process maps. We typically just have them put some bullet points on paper. We're trying to get the 20% of the steps to deliver 80% of the value, because they can do that pretty quickly, and it's enough. The second thing we want to do is make sure that everybody who touches a process knows what it is, and they follow our way of doing it. So the goal here is that if we were going to go to St. Louis and create a St. Louis version of your business, we have the binder. We can say, do this, and you're going to get it our way. The main thing we do that's a little bit different here is that most people think about process in terms of operations. That's where most people are familiar with it. Jill does process and sales. We emphasize that process exists across the entire business. So you start with an HR process. We have some way of hiring people. We have some way of firing people. We have ways of rewarding, promoting, recognizing people. We should have a marketing process. There's a set of things that we do on a regular basis that let the world know that we exist. Sales process, how do we take that awareness and convert it into revenue? Typically, 2, 3, 4 core operations processes, some finance processes, some kind of after-sale customer service, customer care process. That's kind of a generic list. So we're looking across the business to find those things that we do that uniquely make us us. And then we're going to document them and get a kind of an 80-20 level. And then the important thing is make sure everybody who touches those processes follows them, does it our way. And once they're documented and we're following them, we have the opportunity to examine them and figure out how to make them better. But it's now not an ad hoc process. It's happening within a structure. So, just a few words about the process component. Are we good there? Any questions, comments? Okay. The last component.
Dan, I got a question. What's the FBA?
Followed by all.
Followed by all.
Followed by all. Thank you. The traction component, again, right underneath vision. Why? Because vision without traction is hallucination. We are awake this morning. I love it. So we emphasize two things in the traction component. The first is this notion of what we call rocks. And again, I'm not going to take the time to explain why we use that term, but you understand these are quarterly goals. Again, 3 to 7 for a team, 3 to 7 for each member of the team. If as an individual you own one of the team rocks or 2 of the team rocks, they're at the top of your list of individual ones. So if I have a leadership team of 5 people, we'll have 20 to 25 quarterly goals represented in the room. These are the things that are most important to do in order to be on track, to get where we want to be by the end of the year, to get where we want to be in 3 years, and so forth. The magic of this is the quarterly gains. 90 days turns out to just sort of the right period of time. Okay? And for very arbitrary reasons, we tend to work monthly. Right? The month is a completely arbitrary. It's the length of time it happens to take the moon to revolve around the Earth. It has nothing to do with anything relating to human psychology. 90 days turns out to be about the length of the human attention span. It's long enough to get a real chunk of work done, just short enough to remember when you walk out of the meeting that you're going to be held accountable. Right? That if you make it much longer than that, people tend to walk out of the room going, I don't really have to start right. So 90 days just happens to work. And what happens when companies start to get good at this process of setting a small number of goals, working really hard on them to get them done for 90 days, seeing how they did, instead of creating a new set and just repeating that cycle, they don't turn into rocket ships. What actually happens is they sort of turn into Sherman tanks plowing through the forest. Right? They just become relentless. So you see, every 90 days, just chunk, we got a big bunch of work done. Chunk, got some work done. Chunk. And they get this relentless quality of consistent progress to them. So that's a big part about sort of the focus and getting work done. And then the other thing that goes with that is how we handle meetings. The meeting cadence for the process I'm describing is weekly, quarterly, yearly. Again, we don't work monthly. Weekly, quarterly, yearly. And the glue that holds this whole thing together is this wonderful weekly meeting. And the secret sauce to that meeting, I could spend more time talking about it, but the key thing is that we separate reporting from issue solving. So we spend the first roughly 20 minutes of the meeting reporting on a set of things with zero discussion. And the reason for that is that in 20 minutes, without stopping to discuss things, we can do this. Okay? We can take the pulse of the business very comprehensively, and by the way, we can inject some accountability, so we can actually use the meeting to drive the pulse of the business once a week by holding ourselves accountable for whether we did the things that we said we were going to have done by now. If we stop to discuss, what happens is we get distracted, we get stuck on something, and we never get to the rest of it. And something really important may be buried in there. So we spend the first 20-ish minutes of a 90-minute weekly leadership team meeting just reporting, and that leaves us with an hour plus a little bit to be right here solving whatever issues have come up in the last week. And we do that in order of priority, so that the things we're working on today are the things that are most important today, not the order in which they're listed, because who knows what the actual order of importance is. We oftentimes don't clear the list, and that's okay, because the things we didn't get to today were not the most important things, and it turns out they'll keep. Right? It actually turns out they'll keep. You know, I teach my clients a Chinese proverb: when I go slow, I go fast. Just having this nice, steady cadence, it is amazing how much work people can get done. So that's what the model and the system look like. Fairly fast look at what's under the hood. In the 3 or 4 minutes we have left, what else can I tell you that would be helpful to you?
Dan, give us a situation other than you mentioned Stern earlier. Give us another situation where, or maybe even 2 situations, maybe 2 minutes apiece, of where this kind of, you have this problem. This is how we did it. This is how we solved it.
Right. So the process is the same. You know, it's a very structured set of sessions and curriculum for those sessions that we take companies through. So there isn't a unique solution for every situation. What we're doing is we're establishing a framework and helping the company populate that framework with their own content. You know, 2 quite different situations. I've got one company I'm working with that's run by a really strong leader, a 2nd generation, and he's moving toward an exit. And I'm there to help him and his team get the business to the strongest, most profitable level they can, and use earn-out attaches. Clearly, money motivated. These guys do a very nice job running the business. They're a little loose on some things. They have some trouble staying focused on their goals. The biggest problem is one guy on the leadership team who just has a way of rubbing people the wrong way. He's a great guy. He knows his business. It's just sort of that problem. We've been working together now for not quite a year, and it took about 4 sessions in total before all those issues about that one guy just came to the surface, and now they talk and they're working together, and everybody started to understand that even though we have some personality struggles, we actually all really care. We actually really like each other. Right? So we've gotten to this level of truth-telling and honesty and vulnerability on the team, where he's stopped being defensive, people have stopped being scared of him, and the team is just moving a lot better. And we've just tightened up a bunch of stuff elsewhere. They're now much better at setting realistic, achievable goals, not setting too many, focusing on priorities, and they're exceeding plan very nicely. Now, this is not a company that was struggling in any way. So that's one example.
Has it done just the opposite? Has it not only helped their business internally, but has it helped it externally? I mean, is their profits moving in a positive direction?
Yeah, they're, like I said, exceeding plan.
Okay.
Absolutely. So at the other end of the scale, I have a company that's a sub-$10 million business, and it's something that's derivative of construction. That's as much as I'll say. The owner of that company, and it's been stuck at the same size for 10 years, because it's as big as the owner can grow it. On day 1, the owner, the very first thing we do actually is the right seats portion of Right People, Right Seats. And in that process, he held up his hand and said, I am not the guy who should run this business day to day. but he is a very slow-moving guy, and his entire team are very slow-moving people. That was 22 months ago, and last month he finally hired somebody to run the business day to day. That business has not grown yet. In fact, I've advised them to not try to grow it because they have so much infrastructure to fix that if they try to grow it, they're just going to throw more weight on a broken truck. Now that they have this wonderful day-to-day operating, it's a great hire, they can start to do some of this building. They can start to strengthen the rest of the team. But if you ask that guy what he's gotten out of this, even though he hasn't seen growth in profit yet, what he would tell you is, this process has forced me to deal with the issues I've been hiding from for a decade. And
We're going to get the chance to ask Dan more questions, but that's our time for today's meeting. But thank you, Dan,
Thank
for
you.
coming to Trust Builders Network and sharing
My
with
pleasure.
us. And again, we'll be
What is the structure of your consulting room?
Right.
Is it